think we didn't advertise the great what's it the bout. I'm trying to think of don't I was gonna say the Thrilla in Manila, but we're not in Manila, so I don't know.
Yeah. Uh yeah, no, it's been a couple of months, so yeah. Uh,
You sound like a boxer who hasn't been training. Uh, you just like look on your calendar and realize you have a title bout coming in the next couple days. Not gonna make weight.
yeah, it's been a rough few months with stuff like so when I was in Manila, I got sick.
I'm on a call.
And then when I went over to whatchamacallit, when I went over to Linux Foundation Member Summit last week, I also got sick there. And I'm just like, it's so if I don't do well, I can say like, oh, I wasn't at my healthiest.
I did watch the recording for last week, and at least we tossed out a message there saying, "Hey, this was going to happen." And it looks like we've got some returning attendees, so not all is lost.
Yeah, Mike wasn't here to say he wouldn't do it, so
Or like, he's trying to get the odds on poly market or whatever it's
Yeah.
called. He's trying to tilt the odds.
Yeah, I'm very quickly right now going into Gemini saying, what was that executive order on again?
All right. Well, it looks like we are pretty quickly getting critical mass. Um, the meeting notes are, do I have the ability to like pin these or something? No. Uh, Meeting notes link, I'll post it one more time, is in the chat in Zoom. Feel free to add yourself to the list of attendees. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and posted to LFX and YouTube shortly after. Your participation in these meetings is an agreement to abide by the Cloud Native Code of Conduct, which can be found in the repo. Um, we need some scribes, maybe not so much for the debate, but just for any additional. Thanks, Evan. Um, and then otherwise, yeah, we have a presentation, if you will, scheduled for today. We're going to be doing one of the world famous debates that we hold here at Tag Security and Compliance. Um, and then with the time remaining, we can walk through any additional agenda items and things that we wanted to discuss for updates. But before we do that, do we have any new attendees joining us today that would like to introduce themselves?
Probably me. Hello, everyone. I'm Marco. I'm a postdoc associate at NYU. I just joined the Professor Capo's lab 2 days ago, and thanks for having me. And I hope to contribute to this project.
Wonderful. Welcome. All right. Besides that, none other heard. Yeah. With unless there's anything else that anybody wants to bring up, we can kick off our presentation for today.
Are you the
all right.
moderator? Who? Oh wait, who's the
Uh,
moderator?
I was going to be moderating if that
Awesome. Great.
works for folks. We'll start out. I have a little bit of a introduction background prepared for things. And to set the stage for the conversation, for those who know or don't know, in May of 2021, President Biden issued Executive Order 14028 called Improving the Nation's Cybersecurity. There were two main components to this, one of which was requiring uh, vendors of software to the federal government to provide SBOMs, so software bills of material, and to provide self-attestations of compliance with NIST SSDF, the Secure Software Development Framework, which, interestingly, cited our supply chain security best practices document as a reference to how to properly secure your supply chain. So, a few years later, change of administrations within the White House, the separate memorandum was issued rescinding those two requirements and their implementations. One of the comments about the reason for rescinding them was that they imposed unproven and burdensome software accounting processes that prioritize compliance over genuine security investments. So they did, however, leave up individual agencies to have their own discretion as to whether or not they would require either of these types of documents or have other sorts of requirements for vendors of software to them. So with that, I'll give Mike a chance for any sort of opening statements about the current situation.
Wait,
Or just
can I make
yeah.
one in this debate? Mike and I are taking positions that are extreme positions that are not necessarily the positions that we actually hold. So we probably have more nuanced feelings.
Yeah.
But we are going to be stepping deeply into different corners.
Yes, yes. So like don't over-index a little bit on how extreme I'm attaching to this thing. But just yeah. So all right. So I think that or rather the executive order was it 14028 improving the nation's cybersecurity. Um it mandated various things across specifically across the government and how they sort of view acquiring software and how they look at viewing software. And I think it did a job that was very much missing, which was uh, before you had this executive order, you had multiple different um, every single agency, and in fact, across the military, you had individual groups within the military all having their own individualized procurement processes. And that was a nightmare to deal with. The executive order sort of standardized around things like software bill of materials, which made it which sort of centralized sort of that procurement and sort of said, hey, all sort of software should have a software bill of materials. And that was a good thing because the other options were, in my opinion, much, much worse. And the ambiguity around a lot of that is much, much worse. And the lack of standardization was much, much worse. So, yeah. And I think now that it's been removed, we're now back in a similar sort of spot where every single department and every single agency is now going to potentially have a separate procurement process. Um, and yeah, that's my sort of opening.
Justin?
Sure. So while it's nice to streamline the bureaucratic acquisition process across different parts of the government, that's not necessarily something that that level of compliance, uh, you know, uniformity is not necessarily something that actually helps people. And that's what this is supposed to be about. This was supposed to strengthen the cybersecurity. This wasn't supposed to reduce the burden of the government figuring out what they get in pieces of software. And to that end, this is repealing a failed executive order and rightfully calling it out as something that at best was window dressing, and at worst was giving people really a false sense of security and really harming them into thinking that they knew what was in their software, when in fact these documents that were being produced are wildly inaccurate in practice. The actual meaningful controls that people should have been putting in place are things that were being avoided because they're doing this other crazy compliance work. And so rescinding this will help to get the focus back where it belongs, which is on actually effective security techniques.
Okay, so maybe the first question I have for each of you is building on Justin's point around the accuracy, and also I think Michael's point around the difficulty in being allowed to provide software to different government agencies with a wide array of standards. Do either of you have examples of ways in which this placed an undue burden on organizations of different sizes, or difficulties that they encountered in producing these documents that may have led to accurate or inaccurate SBOMs, or either eased or increased the difficulty in actually providing software for the government as organizations? And since we let Mike start with the opening, we'll let Justin respond first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is so broad of an issue. It would be it would be embarrassing for me to even be anecdotal. This is not like how do you know that this is like how do you know that a car has ever crashed into another car? It's like automotive deaths are like one of the largest killers of people in the US. So yes, this happens all the time. Like I don't know how to get around that. And SBOMs are just wildly inaccurate across the ecosystem. I haven't seen, I've actually we've heard great things from, our friends in the government who are working in some of these agencies that are consuming some of these things, that this is causing them no end of new problems they didn't have before, because they're getting data in all kinds of different formats that they feel that they need to parse and look at. It's large, it's cumbersome, it's missing things. So really what this executive order could have said is it could have said, give us many megabytes of partially right data about what you think could possibly be in your thing. And then whenever we have a major security problem and we actually need to know if something is in our stuff, we're still going to have to look at everything because the data that everybody gives us isn't right. That's effectively what this has boiled down to.
So I, of course, disagree with that pretty pretty much there. So I think the thing is taking essentially a problem that was people were already describing software and providing information about vulnerabilities, but in a completely ad hoc nonsense way. Things like spreadsheets, things like calling you up over the phone and saying, hey, yeah, we have a vulnerability. And now switching to some standardized way of doing it is better than no way of doing it, or a completely arbitrary and individualized way of doing it. So, and again, like no one is saying that you're going to go from no no one is saying that you're going to go from zero to complete and accurate overnight. This stuff is going to take time. And I think the thing there was it was already in a much better place than it was. And again, incomplete data is probably better than no data, or the data is in no way organized, centralized, etc. And things like SBOM were pushing us into that direction. And then also, in addition to that, one area I do want to kind of, because I know we're mostly talking about the SBOM part of it, but the EO did still also recommend things like various, adopting various good security practices as part of this, which I think should still be, which even if you were to say, hey, the SBOM requirement, it feels a little bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater by just saying, yeah, get rid of everything.
Can I briefly respond?
Yes.
Okay. So, first of all, I'll say that I think the framing of this debate specifically is about the SBOM aspect.
Oh, okay.
So because of that, I will just flat out say I will not try to take a contrary position. And I'll say yes, I agree that them following reasonable standards is good. But to talk about your other point, are you proposing that CVEs did not exist until this executive order, and that there is no way to communicate vulnerability information or other things like this? I think this is a matter, which of course, these and others have been around for a very long time. So there are already mechanisms for this. There just isn't this enforced way to give this incorrect, incomplete list of what possibly could one day have been thought to have been our dependencies, which is, I think, the thing. And it's not that that information in a standard format wouldn't be useful, but the fact that it hasn't been mandated to be done in a way that actually adds security, it's just a compliance checklist. Like, hey, if it was just, hey, you have to print a list of ingredients on every piece of food, but we're never going to check it, and it's going to be wrong. And just in the end, oh well, that doesn't really add much, and that's unfortunately what this executive order did, which created a lot of unnecessary burden for people across the ecosystem, and has pushed them away from things that would have actually provided them real knowledge and really useful information.
So perhaps a slightly different question following on to this is, did the government go far enough? Should the government try to ease this burden by expanding the scope of the executive order and perhaps providing funding through various mechanisms like the National Science Foundation or DARPA in order to help provide mechanisms to develop tooling that could create more accurate SBOMs or improve these security practices in a more practical way throughout the industry?
So, I mean, I have a feeling this is going to be the non-controversial, like it is going to be a fairly non-controversial one, because whether or not you agree with the EO or not, it's like, hey, should we have better funding to figure it out? Yeah, probably. So I do think, I would argue, yeah, the EU should further be refined. We were seeing that I can't remember exactly when the original EO came out, but in 2025, right before the switchover in administration, there was they had yeah they tried to strengthen the executive order a little bit, and further refine it, and then as it's so what I would say is I do think that it didn't go far enough, and I would want it to go further, right? I want to see things be successful, and I think generally things like guidance versus requirements are always going to be, I guess the thing I would argue is is going much more the European path of defining, hey, this is what an SBOM is, and this is what SBOM tooling is, and this is how it needs to be done, is going to be more effective than half measures around general guidance around you should be trying to do these sorts of things. And you should have an SBOM, but we're not going to tell you what SBOM to use. So I would say it should be more rigorous.
I will try to take a mildly contrary position here. I do think there was support. And I actually think that the level of funding that the government put in, while could have been slightly increased, was mostly adequate. I actually think that there were two other problems. Because to be honest, as many of you know, one of the projects that I'm a creator of, the SBOMIT project, is like head on addressing this problem. And a lot of the work with attestations that, by the way, SBOMIT and our InToto work that created this attestation stuff that's used everywhere, they were both funded by the government. So the government was in the right, trying to do the right things, and did provide some resources. I would say across the whole government ecosystem, they probably provided, not to us, but they provided on the order of $10 million, which is a moderately substantial amount of money. We got a small, a portion of that, not a tiny percentage, but not nothing, not like all of it or anything, not like half of it or anything. So the thing is that I think that the part that's being missed here, or that was said that I want to re-emphasize, is you do actually need the hook. You need you have to do this because, people were not adding SBOMs to things because they thought SBOMs added value. They were adding SBOMs because they had to add SBOMs. And if they had to do good security practices instead of good, I don't know, it's even good, but compliance practices that don't quite match up with what is needed, then we would have a much stronger sort of knock-on effect. So we need some amount of money to figure out what the right thing to do is. That money might have been a little short, but was maybe roughly adequate. But what we really needed is we needed the executive order to say, these are the things you actually do need to do. And to have people pilot that. And probably that executive order what needed to happen is someone needed in the government to go and say, we are going to deploy some of this stuff internally. And then after that, we're going to mandate it. After we've had some of the stuff that's been developed that looks promising be a little more battle tested. Because where we ended up with stuff being required that was not up to the tasks that it is being put to, and is not had the security benefits that people had envisioned initially.
So perhaps a related but different perspective is the EU CRA, which is requiring SBOMs. One of the other things additionally requiring is the necessity of issuing security patches and updates for software that is sold for, I believe it's somewhere between 3 to 5 years after the last version of that software. Do you think that the executive order in the United States did anything to influence that and indirectly improve the security or the requirements of other legislation across the world?
So I think more global adoption of SBOMs is a good thing. More global adoption of these approaches are a good thing. What I would love to see is a unified approach. The thing that is I am worried about is by having too many separate suggestions and whatever, you're going to end up having a you're going to have fragmentation. So that's I think the worry is EU CRA requiring this, I think, is a good thing. Requiring SBOMs and requiring reporting of SBOMs not just to the procurer but also to potentially to regulatory authorities is a good thing. But I worry that if Asia requires a slightly different SBOM than Europe, then it just causes a huge burden on the actual upstream, like the people selling products and that sort of stuff.
I think this is a little bit CRA and others going and mandating this is a little bit like everyone standardizing on ActiveX. So, the nice thing is that everyone's using the same thing. The problem is that it's terrible. And once again, I'm taking a very extreme position here. I'm not necessarily stating my own personal beliefs about this. I'm trying to be interesting for the sake of the debate. But SBOMs are a failure. They're really a failure when it comes to, the basic thing they're supposed to do is, do I need to worry about X? Like, is there arsenic in my candy bar or something like that? That's what they're supposed to answer. And they can't do it. Like, we've had all this time, all these years, all these companies, tons of tooling. So yeah, making more people do this, like, why don't we actually use approaches that work? And I mean, we could try that for a change.
Yeah. So I think my response, and again, going a bit extreme, is essentially that, whether or not, I think we have to be trying something. And a lot of, the old sort of saying is perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think waiting for a holistic sort of solution, and again, uh, you know, just saying here, I am putting my debate hat on. It's like, hey, SBOM it is great, but if it still takes another year or longer for a fully fleshed out SBOM it with that can track just a handful of ecosystems, right? There's still so much stuff out there that we need to be looking at today that I feel like isn't being looked at today. And even if we do have some of these tried and true methods, instituting a ton of additional sort of burden often on the folks who are procuring is like, is a disaster kind of continuing to waiting to happen, because we have for years and years and years, I feel like, told people, hey, you should be having reproducible builds, and you should be looking at what you're pulling into your environments and sandboxing and all these various other things. And I think that's kind of like, we can call for that till the cows come home, and or we can sort of say, hey, and I don't think it's an all or nothing, proposition here. I think we could say SBOMs, sure, and then when these other tools come out eventually, let's start pushing to adopt those as well.
Brant, do you want to take over moderation?
Yeah, and it looks like we have a hand up, so I don't know if
But this might be the time for audience questions.
Yeah, that was what I was going to suggest.
Howdy. I guess that's that's my cue.
That's you.
I spent 2 years trying to push SBOMs and as a requirement for an organization, and ultimately what we found is the investment wasn't worth it because the tooling that utilized those SBOMs wasn't valuable in the analysis of the vulnerabilities discovered in that software. So, right, the only one that I've actually seen fully implemented that I can point to and say this is how to do this would be GCP's binary authorization, where it's tied into the policy, provenance of the deployment, and prevents the deployment based on the availability and the reliability of the SBOM data that's there. Other than that, I haven't seen SBOM data being collected and then being utilized effectively. And when you're comparing that to investments in other areas of security, let's say identity, or logging. Um, there's very few end-to-end solutions, and I think that's an ecosystem issue more than a particular like platform.
Thank you
And
for stepping in and saying something beautiful that I should have said. I wish I had had that experience. I will slip you the $10 after the talk. Venmo it to you.
noted.
Mike, you're muted.
I could definitely comment here on that piece. And again, I'm taking a bit of an extreme view because, again, I do agree here a little on here is I will point to a great OpenSSF project called Guac, which does ingest full disclosure. I'm a maintainer on it. That does there I feel like there are a lot of tools that are out there that do work with SBOMs. There might be some communication problems on making sure folks are aware of these things, but these tools do exist. There's tools like Gripe and like Trivy, both open source and closed source. And and a lot of those tools, there are patterns that, will integrate with things like Keyvrono and Open Policy Agent and similar as well, right? Where, you can kind of get that binary authorization level thing as well. And so I do think that there is that stuff out there. And I think every day it's getting better. But I think the other thing to kind of maybe go back and really kind of hit on the core of it though is like without sort of saying folks should start doing this, and taking that first step and saying, hey, people need to start doing this, I feel like you're not going to have folks building tools in that space in the first place, which I think is a big problem with the incentive is like, hey, without requiring SBOMs, you have a lot of folks who are like, why should I be developing SBOM tooling if nobody's adopting it?
So let me respond to this a bit. So what I think that the comparison between SBOMs and ActiveX is quite apt because in both cases they really push a bunch of data, mostly that's meant to be human readable, onto humans. And you look at the actually successful security systems that are in place today, and it's very largely systems that tend to be invisible to users. It's systems that are automatically doing verification of your your software updates being correctly signed. It's systems that are doing things like ensuring that this endpoint you're connecting to actually has a valid certificate generated by a CA who's in your browsers or your system's set of trusted CAs, has some chain to get there, or so on. The things that have failed are the ones where, and SBOMs, I think, fall more very often, parts of them at least fall into this, is that at least there are parts and ways in which this format was used and designed, which was not really meant to be just an automated XYZ check. It's not something that you can look at and verify and say, this looks wrong, this looks right. So I think going back to and building more on things that we can more accurately validate, we can have machines check, we can ensure actually correct. That's the foundation that we need to be building from. And eventually, maybe we get to something that is kind of like SBOMs, but isn't really the SBOMs of today. I think that would be a positive place to end up.
Yeah, can I comment on that? So one of the problems we had was in the ability, right? Is it a preventive control or is it detective control? And what are your thoughts on SBOM as I've started to view software as depreciable assets, right? They decay in the same way that physical assets do. And this is where I think SBOMs would really actually be beneficial to kind of say this is the SBOM for this release, and therefore we know starting at this point in time, like we're expecting a depreciation of that value, and over time we can raise the priority of replacement efforts, maybe not necessarily directly security efforts. So I think there's an ambiguity in terms of like who benefits from SBOM, and good examples of SBOMs providing significant value add in the security tool chain.
Yeah, I think this is probably an area where like we will both probably agree on a little bit with I think that thing you said where security is a depreciable asset. Um, I will say yes. The way I view it is software changes in two ways. One is you are making a change to your software, and then the other is the world around you is changing, and that is fundamentally changes your software, right? Because vulnerabilities are discovered day in and day out. End of life, dependencies go end of life. Those things change even though you didn't change a line of your code. So I think that sort of stuff is there. And so for me, I 100% agree that like we need to be and incentivizing more on the way of tooling to do that, to take that and look at the SBOM as just essentially, you know, yes, it's not perfect, but it's the best we have of an ingredient list of the software that makes up your software. And again, things are discovered day in and day out of like, hey, yeah, that thing is bad, or hey, this thing is no longer being supported. And we, having that is super valuable. And then also being able to say, when you go to make a change in your software, you can go back and say, yep, we're vulnerable to this particular thing or whatever.
Would would SBOM ever, and I apologize if I'm taking the mic too much, but would it ever have an extension to indicate that indicated the upgrade path to resolve an issue that is identified in that SBOM? Or, right? Did I ask my question well?
Yeah, so I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but they just generally SBOMs are more, they're better as that static snapshot. And then using other tools, because those other tools are always going to have a better understanding of your current code or what the current life cycle is of let's say upstream. So that's where like tools like Dependabot and Minder and Darnit and all sorts of other things can um, help out. But I think I think a big issue that things have with SBOMs is people do want to put everything in the kitchen sink in an SBOM when really it's best as a ingredient list to your software, as opposed to it's an ingredient list plus a remediation plan plus information about what infrastructure you're using. And like once it gets to that, I think you start to lose a lot of its effectiveness.
Thank you. I think about curl
So,
and what AI has done to curl, and whether or not SBOM would have prevented that whole situation by identifying like this is the path into that. It's been acknowledged, right? It even potentially grabs a CVE or whatever way to indicate like the producer of this software has looked at that and validated that that's not an issue, right? To remove that uh, from the concerns that SBOMs produce ultimately.
Um, I think that we can continue this conversation asynchronously on the Slack channel, but we are currently at 10:40 and we do have a couple other items of business. So I think it probably makes sense to wrap this up. If either Justin or Michael have short closing statements they'd like to include, after that, it's going to go back to Brant. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll start and then so yeah, again, I think revoking the executive order does a disservice to um both sort of government agencies in now they're back to just sort of doing whatever they sort of view as important or not important. and it just sort of leads to increased fragmentation. And then I also think it shows a it doesn't show the right thing to the broader industry and community that SBOM is actually a good thing. Um, and SBOM is a good thing, and people should be generating SBOMs, and they should be using the tools not just to generate SBOMs, but they should be using those SBOMs, ingesting them into things like Guac, using them as the basis for, policy and all sorts of other stuff.
I'll say that I noticed that the closing statement, in fact, none of the statements have really said anything about why SBOMs are good. So it's really if you believe that assertion, then that's true. But if you actually look at the evidence and you hear the testimonies of other folks who have listed their experiences in many different forums, including Benjamin and others, but they have been something of a disaster, and I think they've actually given our community a little bit of a bad name. So I think that we, in many ways, would be better off with pushing for standardization of tools that we know will actually provide real security. And I feel that the fact that we are taking something which clearly is not working and getting rid of it rather than continuing to try to, sink effort into this sunk cost fallacy thing that we have here is a net positive. All right, so we finished our closing statements. Yes, moderator, please take us home.
Thank you each for your participation today. Sorry, I missed the the end of the conversation. I think that as each of you expressed that the real answers and true opinions always have more nuance, and they fall somewhere in between these things. And I personally think that regardless of the outcome of any individual executive order as an industry, I've seen nothing except for collaboration and a willingness to make things better. So yeah, I think I'm optimistic about the future and things that will come. So. And if anybody has other interesting debate topics or ideas for the future, these are always fun. So
yeah,
and Brent,
the moderator, sign up to be a debater, whatever.
Awesome. Thanks all. We still have some time remaining to cover a variety of different topics in today's agenda. I was out last week, but I watched the recording. There sounded like there's some great discussions on the Governo assessment between those who could participate from both sides. And Jim has flagged the assessment for continued discussion today. So I wanted to hit that first and foremost, if that works for everyone. I don't see any thumbs down. So awesome. Jim, if you had any comments in particular that you wanted to hit for next steps.
Sure. Thank you, Brent. Thanks, everyone. Yes, just, kind of maybe summarizing or recapping at least my view on where we are. And Justin, feel free to chime in because you've been also active on leading this. So right now, what over the last week, what we have done is we have gone in and addressed and closed out all the comments. Let me actually screen if I can. So this is the assessment doc itself. So at this point, everything that's left is to be just to be accepted in the doc, and Andy has permissions on that. What we've also done is any of the issues, and there were a lot of good ideas and suggestions. So we've moved that into a tracking issue and listed them here. And I can add the link also to the chat. From my perspective, and happy to kind of discuss and see what others think, but I feel like two main things that stood out, which are interesting. So Kyberno, of course, its main form factor is as an admission controller in clusters. And there's from SIG Security in the Kubernetes community. There's an admission controller threat model. So a lot of our security docs, etc., rely on that. One thing that was pointed out is Kyverno has since from the time that we had done that, it has evolved into more than just an admission controller. You can use it in pipelines and clusters through an SDK. So we need to expand that threat model. So we have noted that issue here, and we'll do that. And then the other thing I think there was a good, interesting discussion on, and again, we're open to suggestions and feedback here, is network policies and admission controllers, especially for something like Kyverno, which also talks to registries and potentially to other API endpoints and other things, right? So we haven't found a good way of having any default, secure network policy because it breaks in various deployments. So today it's more guidelines, but one thing we will do is we will add some samples here and other things on best practices. And I think there was a great suggestion of maybe through the Kyverno CLI being able to generate based on a particular configuration, right? So at least to me, those were the two items that stood out, and we are already working on next steps there. But the main question for the group is like, what do we need to do to close out the assessment? Are there any other things? And I believe, the TOC, we might already be in the quiet period for KubeCon, but they were waiting to hear back on this based on the graduation status.
So usually what would happen at this point is the folks who did the assessment, like Andy, myself, and the other reviewers, would get together and have a meeting, and we would invite. So sometimes we do this individually first if we think we have a lot of questions. Sometimes we do this and we just include like you and Shooting and others from the group in the meeting. But then we always have a meeting with you all.
Okay.
And then what happens then is we have our list that looks basically like the list you showed. And we talk with you about it. And then there's almost always something on that list that you say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because blah, blah, blah. And then you convince us and we say, okay, no problem. We take it off the list. Or you say, oh, we noticed that you flagged X, but you didn't also flag Y. Does that mean we don't need to worry about this for Y? And then we say, oh, no, actually Y should be on the list. We just didn't realize there was a Y, right? And so that list evolves very mildly, but does evolve through that conversation. And then afterwards, we post that joint assessment and your self-assessment.
Okay.
And all that goes up. That's the process. And the thing I don't know that has happened, maybe it has happened, maybe it didn't, but I don't know if all the names on the security reviewers, if we've all had a chance to go back over it and discuss and look at the changes.
Right.
I know that like I saw a flurry of changes, but I don't know if people have actually had a chance to look at them yet.
Probably not, right? Yeah, it just happened over the last week or so. So, no, thank you for explaining that. That makes complete sense. Would love to have that meeting. What is the best way to help coordinate and drive that, right? And again, I know KubeCon EU is coming up, so folks are going to be quite busy. So most likely after, but how should we do this?
Be able to ask and say, who's at KubeCon EU? And I don't know, like it's been a long time for some of these people. But like you could ask and you could see like what works. Me, myself, I wouldn't mind sitting with people for half an hour to an hour at KubeCon and doing this.
Okay.
Like doing the discussion part. I don't mind, but we all really kind of need, or at least a critical mass of us needs to do it together. It shouldn't be like you individually talk with each one, whatever. And usually, since Andy's leading this one, usually he would definitely be the one to coordinate. But we like, so asking on the Slack channel, trying to make it clear you're available would be a good way.
Fantastic. All right. Yeah, I'll do that as a next step. And looking forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you for all those changes. It's been great to get those in.
Yeah.
Turned out really, really well. Yeah.
Yeah, we were, I think the biggest sort of maybe there was a little bit of confusion on the process, but it's fairly clear now, so it makes sense. So happy to get that done.
Great, great.
All right, thanks.
Awesome. With that said, moving kind of back to our standard cadence of agenda, we do look at the other time zone meetings. There was an APAC meeting recently, kind of briefly covered a couple topics such as Security Slam, which we've mentioned a couple times now, and that's going on in the Tag Security public channels. Talked through, looks like initiatives, and then really, I think a big part of kind of what's happening around the APEC meeting and the attendees there and their contributions is Yoki helping advocate and push for the IAM white paper. So it looks like that's moving forward, and it's kind of in a more of a review period. I don't see, could be missing it, like a link that we could point people at. I bet we could find one historically for those who might be interested and want to look at the draft. But it does look like that's moving forward, and maybe we'll be able to figure out how to proceed next. Moving on, TOC meeting updates. Marina, I'll defer to you on what you want to discuss from the previous TOC meeting.
Yeah, I can go really, really fast here because there was a TOC meeting yesterday, one of the public meetings, and basically what happened in the meeting was they just looked at existing kind of sandbox projects and especially sandbox project that some of the metrics show some kind of less activity and look at if the TOC needs to open some health issues to check in on those. So I think nothing super relevant for us here, but you might see those popping up.
Awesome. Thanks, Marina. All right. The rest of our project updates, moving over supply chain security insights.
We're working on wrapping up and collecting the findings from that initiative. Probably 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a PR into the TOC repo with a couple of tools and a summary of the current status.
Awesome. Moving forward to security controls.
I just have a short update. We've reached pretty much the end of milestone 1. The draft PR is up on the contribute site, and there's also a deployed preview of what it's going to look like. I put it there in the chat. So right now, I think we're just looking for feedback on, does this have the right information? How does it look? Does everyone agree with what's there and how it's represented? And then I signed up for the community demo next week, mainly to talk about how this would be used and how it could be used so we can get some consensus around that.
Wonderful. That's exciting. Next up, we have our MCP AuthNZ initiative.
They had no meeting this week. I think they're still reviewing.
Got it. And any updates to Security Slam that we want to mention?
Plug it on. I mean, we're moving forward. About not quite halfway through the 4-week thing so far, right? Let me press the camera button while I'm talking. Sorry. The interesting bit is, well, first up, we have several projects have gotten 2 of the 5 badges so far. I think maybe one project might have 3. The last 2 kind of couple together, so getting 4 badges is going to be a big milestone for most. But aside from that kind of business as usual, plugging along, big win in that there's been a very persnickety evaluation related to like finding binaries, which should be a pretty straightforward thing, but we've consistently had trouble like not lumping the wrong files in and not missing executable binaries, things like that. And some of the folks within the Security Slam got together in a GitHub issue and then on a PR and over the course of like 3 hours debated it until it's like, oh, I think that's the best solution that we've had yet, which is pretty exciting that it's just like, so we're hopefully get that rolled out to LFX pretty soon. But that was a nice little progress.
Yeah. Do you have a link to that
Yeah.
issue? Yeah, Evan, from Evan. Yeah, because I'm curious, like, what was the actual sort of like, what was the issue with finding the binaries? Because again, generally finding binaries shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah, no,
but
it should be really simple. But it's a matter of like executable binaries. So we were using the GitHub API to like, so for a while we are doing it just like by file type. And then we tried to do it by like file type and file name, and then we moved over to GitHub has a field that I think we finally managed to get it working, is like an is binary, but then it was flagging a couple cases of non-executable binaries, and so
like
now
the images or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a PNG is a binary.
Yeah. No, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, you still, like, in most cases, you shouldn't have them live alongside the code, but a lot of folks, they just don't, there's no place to really put it. So
yeah,
If you have a doc site, you might want some images.
Yeah. So at one point we were doing like we actually over the last 2 years we had one iteration where it was a allow list of file types. We had one iteration where it was a disallow list of file types in combinations of the thing, and the final thing that was put together today I think might be just a no-brainer. I'm just like, why didn't we think of that sooner? But you're able to get the file permissions, and it's like the hex or whatever, right? It's the file permissions in the like 0 through 9 form, 000 whatever. And so it's just like, first check the GitHub API. If it says it's not a binary, that is consistently reliable. We don't have false negatives, but we do have false positives. So then it's just checking what are the file permissions, and it's like, oh, why did nobody have this idea over the last 2 years to just do both of those the checking the file permissions. So if it's binary and has like executable permissions on it, then it's flagging, and I think that's probably the best version of the check that we've had yet, which is kind of sad to say because it's like, oh yeah, that seems really obvious now that somebody else had the idea. But they managed to get the data and put it into a condition. So it's a nice little win there.
Awesome. Appreciate the updates. Moving over to triage the current issues. The link here, I believe, is where we point that.
You also have like 30 seconds left.
All right. Well, let's hit it real quick. It's just to say no new issues. If you are looking for anything specific about the initiatives that we have in progress or the ones potentially proposed, this is a great place to look. We didn't have any further to comment on in the project updates today, but for instance, just going back to, if you're interested in the IAM white paper, you can find the initiative issue in that list, and then you could find references to where that draft exists if you want to go read the draft. Likewise, for any of the other open issues that are kind of filtered by tag security and compliance. So with that, we are out of time, and appreciate everyone for attending. Appreciate the debate team for the presentation today, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you.